Welcome, my sunshines, to your session with me, Dr. Deborah Brown. I'm so excited to talk to you this week. How are you doing? So, what are we going to talk about today? Today, our topic is connecting to the life you want, change, hope, and priorities. So, last time in our last session, we talked about why people come to therapy and what is typically going on with people when they're reaching out for help. And what we came to was that idea that people feel lost. People feel like they don't have a direction. They don't know what to do. Everything feels so important and so overwhelming. And okay, so we know that. But now what? What do we do with that information? That's my favorite puzzle. That's what I love about what I do. Is people come in and go, "Meh, I don't feel good." Or I'm not okay. And my job is to dig around and to find out why. What's behind that? And I look at things like, how do they feel? How do they behave? What do they think? And I help them to understand that they can change a lot of those things. Everything in us operates on a very simple kind of flow. And the flow is this: thought, feeling, behavior. Everything that we do starts with a thought. It leads us into a feeling, and then we act based on that. So if I walk by a window and I see a beautiful bikini and I go, "There's a beautiful bikini." There's my thought. And my feeling is, "I couldn't wear that. Look at that mannequin. I don't look like her." There's my feeling. And my behavior is, "I can't wear that." So in that sequence of thought, feeling, behavior, it went by in a second. I just kept walking, but it reinforced a belief that I had about myself. What if I pulled those things apart, thought, feeling, behavior? What if I took a little more time with each one? What if I walked by and my thought was, "That's beautiful. How pretty is that?" And my feeling instead was, "Wonder what I would look like in that. I bet it might be cool to try." And my behavior was, I went in and I tried it on and I felt amazing. How different would my life feel if I could think of myself as able to have what I wanted, or able to choose something, or not limited by some negative belief about myself? If we changed that, we change a lot of things. It's not about a bathing suit. It's about the way that I feel when I walk down the beach in the Bahamas in that bathing suit, and the way that I feel when I cover up versus when I get to be comfortable. And the truth is that the only person it really matters to is me. It matters more to me than anybody. But how I handle it in myself is very often the way that I learned from other people how to handle it. So I want to teach you how to identify what you really want, what your priorities really are, and to get rid of those external voices around you that tell you to believe something that might not be true about you. So people don't have the life that they want. And a lot of times it's one thing. It's not everything. We have all these different pieces of us who we're connected to, what we do for work, who we take care of, how we live our lives. It's not usually everything. People will say it's everything. It's usually one thing that pollutes everything else. So if we think about it, think about if you hurt your foot. Eventually you start walking differently. And then eventually your knee hurts. And then eventually your hip hurts. And eventually your whole leg hurts. So you go to the doctor and say, "My leg hurts." Well, it all started with your foot. Your foot was the thing, but it made everything else hurt and everything else go out of whack. We want to dig and find, what is the thing? What is your foot? What is the thing that hurts in you? And a lot of times it is the way that we think about ourselves. but sometimes it's the way that we prioritize our time and how we behave. But how we behave, as we just learned, starts with a thought and a feeling. Thought, feeling, behavior. I want you to think about how quickly you move through those things instead of separating them out into the three unique pieces of cognition and of living that they actually are. So, whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that we do that? Well, inevitably, it's ours. We're the ones that think and feel and behave. Where does it come from? Comes from things you learned a long time ago and comes from things that you reinforce in your life every single day. So we're going to be doing learning here together, but we're also going to be doing some unlearning. And one of the things that we have to unlearn is some of the automatic processes and things that we do that we don't even think about anymore, but that make us sick, make us not okay. So when people come to me, sometimes they are pretty sick. They're mentally ill, or they're just struggling, but they don't feel good. What's the definition of being sick? I don't feel good. And they say, I'm overwhelmed. I hear that one, every day. I'm overwhelmed. And it's something we've all felt. Everybody knows what that feels like. But what is overwhelmed? Overwhelmed is actually not overwhelmed. It means that we're out of balance, that we have too much of one thing and not enough of another. So think about this. The last time you went, I'm overwhelmed, it was because there was too much of something and not enough of something else. Usually it's about too much work, too much responsibility, too many demands, and not enough reset time or relaxation time or recharge time. So the problem is that overwhelmed is supposed to be a moment. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm going to fix it. But it's not for a lot of us. Overwhelmed becomes a way of life. I wake up in the morning and I'm tired before I even start. I'm overwhelmed by all of the pieces of our lives. How could we not be? Look at all of the things that we have to do, right? You have to do your standard human roles, right? You have to do your work role or your money-making role or your parenting role or your partnership role or all of the things that you have to do. And if you look at the internet, it's going to tell you that you have to exercise every single day and you have to put on all your makeup correctly and you have to wear a certain thing. There are so many things that we have to do according to all the things outside of us that it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. So overwhelmed is out of balance. Too much of one thing, not enough of another. Do that long enough and you end up with a profound sense of powerlessness. How many of you have woken up in a day already tired and think, I have to robot myself through this day? I'm powerless to change anything. And it feels very real. And in that moment, it might be. But you can change some things to eliminate that powerlessness. And we're going to talk about that today. But the problem with powerlessness is eventually you become a prisoner. You become a prisoner of your own life. Many of the mental illnesses that I see are anxiety and depression, which are directly caused by feeling powerless in your life, feeling unsafe, out of control, insecure. Those things over time erode you and they develop into some pretty nasty mental health disorders that can really make you sick. So it might start with, I'm tired. It might start with, I'm overwhelmed, but it ends with powerlessness, rumination and overthinking, and could end up in depression or chronic anxiety. So problem with all of that is that we don't always know there's an antidote. We just think it's what we have to do. And there is an antidote. There are a million things you could do. Just walk to the self-help section in the bookstore. There are a million things you should be doing or could be doing. And how do you know which one to do? What we really need is to think about the ones that work for us and the ones that we have room to add in. And everybody always says the same thing. I don't have time for that. I've got to do this. I have leaves to rake. I have laundry to do. How can I take a walk, right? And the truth of it is that that is true for a lot of us. But we have decisions to make every single day about how we spend our time and what our priorities are. That really will dictate how we feel about our lives. So think about this. You're overwhelmed and you're overwhelmed all the time. And then somebody pokes you, asks for something else. What do? You react. You jump, you yell, you you speak roughly, you cut somebody off in traffic. We become reactive, not because that's who we are, not because we're angry people, not because we're hateful people. We become reactive because we don't have anything left to give. Everything has been taken. But the problem is reactivity ruins relationships. It makes us not the best parent sometimes. It makes us not the best partner. It makes us an absent friend. And I want you to think about the days when you're reactive. Are you reactive a lot? Are you doing that to people around you? And it's not who you are, which is why it feels so terrible. But your reactiveness, your jumpiness, your snapping at somebody is a direct response to the fact that your cup is empty and you have nothing else to pour, and people are still asking you to pour. So there's a self-sabotage in that. When you lose your relationships, you're losing something really important to you. When you have to use a substance to escape, when you have to sit on the couch and sit on social media or TV for hours in order to recover from your day, that's really not healthy. That's self-sabotage. So many people I talk to live the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They survive from Monday through Friday. They work, they get home, they crash into the TV or to social media. They sleep, they start over again. And on the weekends, they do all the things they have to do. That is a terrible way to live. And it's how most people, unfortunately, have to live in some regard in order to pay for their lives. And the problem is that that's a pattern that we fall into, and we believe that that's the only way. It's like the people who start to smoke weed at night to sleep. And they do it because they're tired and they need to sleep. Nothing wrong with that. But then they do it earlier. And then they do it as soon as they get home. And then they do it every night. And then they do it all weekend. And we've gone from something that's a normal, recreational, helpful thing into something that's an escape. And I remember back in the day, I remember drinking wine at night and thinking, oh, how nice is this? I get to come home and I get to crack open a bottle of wine and drink a glass. And that felt elegant and fabulous and very Italian and European. And then all of a sudden, I began to look forward to it. And I began to think, wow, I get to go home and I get to just sit on the couch and I get to open the wine. And then I started realizing that the bottles were piling up in the recycling bin and that maybe people would see that. And then you start to think, well, if I buy the box of wine goes in the fridge. That'll work. It's not a bunch of bottles. And then you start thinking, well, the bottles people could count. Nobody knows when I change the box. And I can rip it up in little pieces and throw it away. And then the next thing you know, you're buying a box every week and then a box every 2 days. And then you've got yourself a nice little problem. So I didn't buy the boxes anymore. I didn't buy the bottles anymore. And I stopped because I knew for me that that was an escape that felt way too good and was way too bad for me, and began to blot out the real priorities that I had. And I think there's so many things that can do that to us, whether it's online gambling, porn, TV, social media. There's so many things that we can get addicted to, and we do. I've seen incredible addictions to things like porn and online gambling, to the tune of lost marriages, to the tune of debt of hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of these things came about because a person's needs weren't being met and they needed to escape away from their life into a different place or a different feeling. When most people have it all right there, we have people, we have things we could do, we have healthy coping. But once we grab something to cope, we attach to it. We develop a pattern and we get stuck in it. So if you know what your real priorities are, what's really important to you, you realize very quickly those things don't fit, but they feel so good and they work. So we have to make sure that we're living lives where we're not so exhausted that online casino games are more attractive than our lives because they feel good. They give us the dopamine burst. They help us relax. And they're like a steady friend that's always there until they take all of your money. So we're going to talk about what gets us there. What gets us there is survival mode. We get to that point because we are in survival mode. And you hear people saying it, I'm in survival mode. What does it even really mean? What it really means is this, is that in survival mode, everything is equally important. I have to do the laundry. I have to do the grocery shopping. I have to go to work. I have to take care of this. I have to do that. And when everything feels like an equal priority, everything needs your attention all at once and it's overwhelming. And when we live in survival mode after a while, we get exhausted and we shut down and we escape. So think about survival mode as a main cause of stress. Everybody talks about stress. We all have stress. A little bit of stress is inherent in the way that we live. But too much stress actually will kill you. And you hear that and it sounds kind of non-specific. You know that if you smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, you're going to probably get sick from that. We know that's a direct cause and effect. But stress, it's a little more unclear. Stress will kill you. Well, what does that even mean? Think about this. What is the number one cause of death in the United States for both women and men? Think about it. What comes to mind? It's heart disease. It's heart disease for women and men. 1 in 5 people will die from heart disease. That's a lot, right? It's more than cancer. It's more than any of the other things that can happen to us. So what's heart disease? Heart disease comes from sometimes genetic factors, but more often high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, sedentary behavior, stress, all of these things. So if a heart disease comes from your lifestyle factors, how do our lifestyle factors arise? How do we become sedentary? How do we become stressed? How do we become inactive? How do we eat the wrong kinds of food? Well, it's our mental health. Our mental health is what drives us to have our lifestyle factors. So if your mental health isn't in order, your lifestyle factors get way out of order, you are much more likely to die of a heart attack. So the number one cause of death in the United States is a heart attack or heart disease? Nope. It's actually mental health because your mental health leads you to places where you are healthy or unhealthy physically. So when we're talking about you being a little overwhelmed and tired and you walk into my office with those symptoms, that's as serious as a heart attack for me because that's where you're headed. So how do we undo it? How do we change it? And the way that we change it is by thinking about the idea that we are too hypervigilant. Hypervigilance is the state of awareness or sensitivity that is higher than it should be. You hear stories about people with PTSD, trauma responses, where you touch them and they jump. That's a really easy way to think about hypervigilance. But more often, it's about somebody who's so overwhelmed and keyed up that they're so jumpy and so hyper aware that they can't sleep at night, that they can't stop thinking about things. That level of hypervigilance is not necessary and it's not healthy. So we have to get that down. How do we get the hypervigilance down? We think about, well, what's really important? What is it we really actually have to do? And we start looking at priorities. So a lot of us, the problem with this is that we're living in the future. And that's what anxiety is. Anxiety is you living in the future. If I just worry about this enough, it won't happen. Or my favorite one, I'll be prepared if it happens if I worry enough. It's not how that works. So anxiety builds because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen to us. So then we become very hypervigilant, waiting for things to happen. The other half of that is depression, where we live in the past or in our negative thoughts or in our fears to the degree that it shuts us down. So survival mode breeds these states of extremes, living in the past, living in the future. And what we really should be living in is the reality of what's in front of us. Yes, the leaves have to be raked, the laundry has to be done, but do they have to be done today? And even more importantly, do they have to be done by you? So, how do we figure out what's really important? How do we figure out our priorities? This is tricky. There's no master path, there's no key to knowing how to do all of this, because the truth is that it's different for every single one of us. Every one of us has a different path. Every one of us has a different goal inside of us. Everybody has different feelings about what's important. But we don't listen to those voices. We don't listen to the truth about where we really are. We get bogged down in all of the shoulds and all of the musts, and often all of the ways that we try to please other people first. It's an important thing to think about. And what happens is in these cases, we end up very, very hopeless. It's never going to get any better. Nobody's ever going to change. Nobody's ever going to help me. Nothing is ever going to be different for me. And once we lose hope, we get into despair. And once we get into despair, we get into depression. And I don't know if you have ever known someone who is severely depressed, but it is about the lowest steps of misery that you can end up in. So the loss of hope is very, very dangerous. So one of my favorite poems in the world is by Emily Dickinson. And she was a saucy little thing, because what Emily Dickinson did was she said words that sounded very pretty and interesting, but very often there was a different message underneath. And she said, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." Sounds very lovely and elegant and hopeful, but think about what she said. Hope is the thing with feathers. It's fleeting. It can fly away very, very quickly. So to learn to have hope is something you must work very hard at. And it can fly away. So we have to work really hard on being hopeful. How do we become hopeful? We learn about what we can control and what we can't. We learn about what's really important. And how do we learn these things? By really thinking about our lives and what we really have to do at any given moment versus the droning on that we do and the path that we all follow. So there are all of these chapters in our lives, and we talked about this last time, that in different phases we need different things, and different things happen to us at different times. So our priorities have to change all the time. And a lot of times the mindset that you had at 25 is not the mindset that works at 55. And I see a lot of men with this, where men will come in their 50s and in their 60s, and they struggle with the idea of their virility. They struggle with the idea of their sexual performance, their masculinity. And as they lose that currency, as their testosterone goes down, they begin to believe they are less valuable. And they believe that that chapter somehow becomes less important because they weren't what they once were. Women do it too. Women do it with their looks. Our looks are our currency. You can buy a lot with your looks. You can buy a lot with your charm. But as you get older, the thing that worked in your 20s may not work in your 50s. And there's a loss there. So how do you look at your life if you believe you're in a time of loss versus just a different chapter? There's something very beautiful to think about being an old woman who can sit with your children and your grandchildren and the people that you love and share your wisdom. We don't glamorize that at all. We glamorize the 20 something who knows nothing about life and think that that's the epitome. And when you talk to older people, a lot of older people don't romanticize their 20s and their 30s. People who are healthy emotionally in their 60s and 70s realize that they've learned things and that they can have a really different kind of chapter when they're not mourning what they've lost and instead celebrating what they actually have. So this is why you have to do a lot of work around shifting your priorities according to where you actually are in life. Think of it this way. When you have a newborn infant, your priorities are completely different than before you had children. Everything changes. When your child grows up and leaves the house, you have to shift your priorities again. I have women that come to me in their 40s and 50s, and they just go, I don't feel good. I don't know what it is. And very often, it's because their children have left home. They have spent their whole lives, decades of their lives, being responsible for their children and their identity being their children, that when their children leave, they suddenly feel this void and they think it's them. And that's actually a very natural thing to feel. That's a natural priority that has to shift. Your kids are supposed to go and live their lives. They are supposed to not need you. But if you view that as a void, your priorities haven't shifted where they needed to shift. And then I have people that say that they're unlucky or that they're cursed. And I say, well, why are you cursed? Why are you unlucky? Well, my whole life has been a series of terrible things that happened to me. Okay. Well, when you're a child and things happen to you, that's certainly not your fault. When you're young and you make mistakes, it's not your fault either. Things happen. But when you're older and you make your own luck in some ways, and you're older and you believe that nothing is ever going to go well for you, you're at a point where, are you causing yourself to be cursed? Are you not open to anything else? Some people never shift away from the bad things that happen to them into the possibilities. And the main reason is because they don't put their time into the possibilities. I have incredibly talented people that come to me and say, I used to be this. Well, if you used to be that, why are you not that now? There's an interesting movie I just saw with Amy Adams, and she says, she has a baby and she introduces herself to people as I used to be an artist. And she sees people out and they go, weren't you that artist? And she doesn't understand why she doesn't feel well and why things don't feel great for her in her life. And it's because when she started being a mother, she stopped being everything else. It's one of our biggest flaws in society is that we give up pieces of ourselves for other people. There are times we need to do that in small doses, but you don't stop being an artist because you start being a mother. It's about how are those priorities shifting. For the first couple of years, maybe you don't get to do a lot of art, but for the next years after that, does it come back? Is it a priority? So we do not stay in any one chapter. We move through chapters. But some people don't move through chapters. I feel like everybody knows that person who maybe never really got partnered. And you can look back and think about a time when that person was really hurt by someone, maybe even in their teens or their early 20s, and they never got over it. And they never found another partner because they hung on to the fear that came in that loss, and they never wanted to get near that again. So the lack of taking a risk keeps them from having the very thing that they want. That's an extreme example, but I think a lot of us do that. We don't prioritize the things that actually would give us the life we want because we perceive that we can't. We're going to talk about that today. So how do we make our life more of what we want? There's a little exercise that I love, and I do this with patients, and I do it with myself frequently. I have to change my priorities all the time. There's always something new growing or changing or shifting, and I love that about my life. I love having so many chapters, And I embrace change because I know that change takes me to places that I wasn't before. And I love that. And I want you to love that too. Most people I talk to say, I'm afraid of change. I'm afraid to change things, or they don't say it. They just don't change. But I have learned in the many changes and seasons of my life that change is hard and painful and uncomfortable. But a lot of the changes have been catalysts for taking me to new places and to new things that I didn't know before. So, how do we determine priorities? How do we determine where our energy goes? How do we determine what to change and what to keep the same? This exercise is called the pie chart exercise. Now, everybody has seen pie charts. Everybody has seen the little circle with all of the slivers in it, and all of the slivers add up to 100%, and you move the slivers around to reflect the data. Your life is data. Your life is a bunch of slivers. You might have 20 slivers in your pie chart. I hope that you do. I hope that you have lots of things in your pie chart. But I want you thinking about that pie chart, and I want you thinking about what the slivers actually are. When you start writing them down, there are so many. We have to sleep. We have to eat. We have to move our bodies. We have to make money. We have to take care of the people around us, kids, adults, relationships. We have to do things like take care of our bodies, our homes, our friends, follow our interests, take care of our pets. Every single thing takes up space. You have 24 hours in a day. How do you fit all that in? I remember going to school and a professor then teaching me that there were 24 hours in the day. And a healthy life is 8, 8, and 8. And that it was 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work, and 8 hours of life. And I remember thinking that that was tragic. That 1/3 of my life I'm sleeping, 1/3 of my life I'm working. And if I'm lucky, I get 8 hours for the rest. But then where's my commute? Where's where I clean my house? Where's where I go out with my friends? Oh, that's in your 8 hours. That's all you get. So I decided to make a new pie chart, a new way of looking at it and thinking about how we spend our time. So in the exercise of this, I'm going to ask you to either do this in your brain or do this on paper. So we're going to rethink the way that we do this pie chart by playing around with it in our own lives, using our own lives. So when you look at the pie chart, think about all of your slivers and what they might be, and then start making them bigger or smaller. So there are non-negotiables. Think about that. The first non-negotiable is sleep. Everybody's pie chart in a 24-hour period should have 7 hours of sleep. That number is going to be up and down based on your fitness level, your age, your needs, your health, all of that. But we're going to use 7 as sort of a healthy goal number. Now think about this. What if you sleep 10 hours a day? Now I can tell you, working with patients, I see a lot more oversleeping than undersleeping. There are people that'll come and say, I have insomnia, I don't get enough sleep. But I can tell you I get a lot more of, I'm sleeping 9, 10 hours a day. Now, we do not need that, and it actually can affect your cognitive functioning. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is the difference between 7 and 10 hours a day of sleep is 3 hours. I know what I could do with an extra 3 hours. What about you? So we put our sleep in, 7 hours. Then we put in our work. Most of us have some type of work. We put that in. Those may be not movable, not right now. Then every sliver that we put in, we have to take and give. So if you want to put in a sliver to work with your relationship or work on your relationship, you have to pull that time out of somewhere else. And don't forget the things that we have to do. Think about medical care, right? Is that if you have to go to the specialist regularly, if you go to therapy, if you do physical therapy, anything around your medical, your annual exams, there's a 1% for that. I bet you didn't think of that, right? But you have to do it. It's real. That's what we're talking about. A real estimate of all of your responsibilities in front of you so that you can decide how much time, how much weight, how much effort goes into each one of them. And I'm going to tell you where this can get really interesting. If you get really honest and you put in there your 2 hours a day of social media, and if it's only 2 hours, believe it or not, that's kind of low. You wouldn't believe the numbers that I hear. Now, not a fan of social media. I have to be on it. It's necessary evil. I think it's best in moderation, like many things. But think about 2 hours of social media a day, 7 days in a week, 14 hours a week, 56 hours a month. Now, don't tell me that you don't get to see your friends enough. Don't tell me that you want to take a walk and you can't. Don't tell me that you can't exercise, that you can't prepare food that you love, that you can't read that book you've been wanting to read. I will always be kind to you, but I will also always be firm with you. And I will show you and I will hold up the mirror to what you do and how you behave. And I will remind you of who you are. I don't know too many people whose values would support 56 hours a week, a month, 56 hours a month on a screen looking at social media. Mine don't. What about yours? So when you do that exercise and that social media sliver takes up space and there's no sliver to go on a date with your partner and there's no sliver to see your friends, think about what has to get smaller and what has to get bigger. So think about this if you are a person who wants to have a child and you want to bring a child into your relationship. What time is taken away from other things? You're going to do it because it's important to you, but you're going to have to shift your priorities. So that's why I say this is an exercise you can do literally or figuratively every time something changes in your life, because you can't add something else without taking away from something else. But the problem is most of us take away from the things that make us feel better. We take away from relief, from recharge, from rest, or we take away from health or self-care. Let's look at something like getting your nails done, right? I do that every time for years, and I will never not do it. I put it on my schedule. It's part of my priorities, and it's really, really important because I'm going to do it. Now, is it self-care? Sure, maybe, but it's a part of who I am. It's a part of what's important to me. So that time is scheduled. That's a priority. But also, what does it take away from? What is it I can't do? Well, that's one less patient I can see every 2 weeks. Okay, I'm okay with that decision. So you looking at your priorities can be as something as small as your nails and something as big as your partnership or your children. But there has to be a sliver in there for all of those things, adjusted to what the priority is. And the priority is about what you believe is important. If I believe that spending time with my partner is important, then I better make sure that his sliver is big enough to accommodate that need, and that I'm taking it out of something that's not stealing from me and what I need in my own life. Problem is, a lot of people walk around and feel that they aren't good enough, that they aren't productive enough, they aren't doing enough. We're going to do an episode on that later. Your value is not your production. But of course you don't feel like you're enough and you're not good enough and you're not getting things done. Look at all the things you have to do. Look at all the things that you just put in your pie chart. But they're real things. They're things that are not going to change. They're things you're going to have to do. But you can't walk around feeling like you're not good enough and you can't do anything and you're useless. You have to readjust those priorities to make space for what's important. And I would rather you have a pile of laundry that you do once a month and take a walk every day, if that reflects who you are and what you need. Laundry's just clothes. We need them. But that walk could be the very thing that changes the way you feel about your day and about your life and about your relationships. Don't give it up. So what we're looking at here is balancing our daily life and priorities with our values and our beliefs and our goals. And also, what are you not nurturing in yourself? There are plenty of people I talk to that have interests and hobbies and things that they don't do anymore. I had somebody that had an old car in her garage that she wanted to fix up for 20 years until it rotted away and she had to have it hauled off to the junkyard. And she was so devastated and so sad. And I asked her, how long had you thought about working on it and why didn't you? And she said, I thought about it every day, but I never made it a priority. And I asked her if it was important to her. And she said yes. And she felt bad about it, that she had to throw the car away. It was important to her, and she threw away something important to her because she was very busy taking care of the needs of other people, which was essential, which was necessary. But at what level did she give more than she should have given? At what level should she have been giving to herself instead of others? So it's about taking up space in your own life. Think about that concept. You ever been in a conversation with someone and they take up all the space and it's exhausting? And I have a patient that has someone who tries to loop her into 3-hour phone conversations. And I tell her all the time, this is terrible for you. That person is stealing from you. And her answer is, well, she needs me. And I say, well, you need you too. There is nothing more exhausting than a 3-hour phone conversation with somebody who just talks and doesn't even let you say a word. So instead of prioritizing herself and things that she wants to do, she gives to this person 3 hours at a time. Should she? I would say no. But this person is so used to being uncomfortable that she's more readily able to make herself uncomfortable than to make someone else uncomfortable. It's really nice, isn't it? It's not. It's not. Because what she's doing is not taking up space for herself and giving it to somebody else who really shouldn't have 3 hours of it. So think about how you're taking up space in your own priorities, for sure. So it's really interesting when you think about it, is that we're shifting priorities all the time. You're always putting out what's on fire and doing the thing that needs to be done next, and there's always something else. But that's day to day, that's survival mode. What are you doing in your bigger plan and in your vision to actually create a path toward living differently, toward making changes? One of my heroes, Dolly Parton, I will talk about Dolly a lot because I love her. She talks about vision and dreams. And she talks about the difference between having a vision and having dreams. And I think it's a really important concept that fits well with what we're talking about, because she says dreams are the thing that everybody had back where she grew up, where everybody was poor. People had dreams. They wanted to be or do or feel or have something else beyond the poverty that they had. But the difference was she had a vision. She dreamed of all the same things and maybe even bigger things. But she started to think about how she would make it happen. And she started to create a vision for what she wanted to do and how she was going to do it. And the difference was the people with dreams are still there and are still poor. And the people with vision, like her, created an empire of kindness and creativity and fun and lightness. And that was her vision. So what's your vision? What are you seeing for yourself? Are you stuck in dreams and wishing? Or are you actually creating a vision for something that you can have? It starts with your priorities. It starts with that tiny little sliver in the pie chart of that 1% that you give yourself to work on your vision or work on what's important to you. And then eventually, when you relook at your pie chart, that 1% has grown to 5. And it has grown to 10. And then it becomes a huge part of your life the thing that you wanted to happen versus all the things you had to do. And that's why this exercise is foundational. Creating the pie chart, looking at the reality of what it really is versus what you want it to be, and get your vision in line to start walking toward what you actually want instead. So, what are our biggest limitations here? It's always time and money. Time and money are our biggest commodities. They're the things that we never, ever have enough of. And I can tell you, most of us, from now till the day we die, will not have enough time and will not have enough money. You are not probably going to rely on time and money to make your happiness. It's just too hard to have enough of both of them. You have to find your happiness in the absence of those things sometimes. And I want you to think about that. Very rarely do we arrive at a place where we have enough of those things. I think we visualize it, we dream about it. I'm going to be in that big, massive house with a big, massive pool, and I'm not going to have to work, and I'm going to just lay there and do what I want and have all my friends over, and life is just going to be a party. I hope you get that. I hope I get that. I hope we all get that. But the reality is, it's probably not going to look exactly like that. And in the meantime, how do we get a life before we arrive, right? Do you remember the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes? They would show up on your step with this huge check for $1 million and all of these balloons, and suddenly your life changed and you were free. That's a fantasy. There's vision, there are dreams, and there is fantasy. Most of the time, Mel Robbins says, no one is coming to save you, right? Most of the time, no one is coming to save you. There will not be a massive 10-foot check handed to you on your front door. But what you will have is the choice to look at the limits of your time and the limits of your money, and to live within that in a way to actually have a life before you die, to have experiences that are meaningful to you. I love the idea of the savings box. Is that one time when I didn't have a lot of money, and I love travel. Travel to me is the highest level of experience I think that a person can have, or for my life anyway. And traveling was so important to me, but I didn't have the money to do that. And I remember making a box, and it was a shoebox with a hole and a bunch of stickers all over it. And every week I put something in it, whether it was $1 or $5, or on a good week it was 10 or 20. And eventually just kept putting money in there to represent my hope that even though I didn't have money, was that at some point I might have enough in this box to do something. And I wouldn't miss $5, or I wouldn't miss $1. And that box was my hope. That box represented my vision. That box was not a fantasy. It was real. And if I eventually put enough money in that box, I could open that box and I would be able to have the thing I wanted. So I did eventually open that box, and there was about $1,400. And I did eventually take a trip, and it was amazing. What if I had never had enough hope to make the box? What if I didn't have the hope every week to put $5 in there? What if I didn't believe in a vision for myself? What if I just dreamed and fantasized and never got it? I'd be resentful. I'd be sad. I'd feel like it wasn't fair. But meanwhile, I would have done nothing to get myself there. So I'm asking you to have that hope, and to realize that you don't have to be worthy or perfect or rich or retired to have a really good life. You just have to have the vision to make it 1% at a time, or $5 at a time. There's a book I'm going to recommend to you today, and it's by an author that I really like, and you've probably heard of Brene Brown. She did a really huge TED Talk on vulnerability and shame, And she has a book called The Gifts of Imperfection. And it's about how you can participate in your life from a point of worthiness, no matter where you are, and embracing the imperfections that you have, not as great errors in your humanity, but as the real limitations that we all have around time or money or our bodies or whatever it is that we have as limitations in our lives. And I love this book so much that we're going to ask you if you have any ideas for any further topics for us to discuss. Just send us that in our comments on Instagram. And we're going to give a copy of this book away to an idea that we actually use in a future episode. So I'm always going to sort through all of the muck of the self-help world out there, and I'm going to find for you the things that are useful and are appropriate to the topics that we're talking about. And I like that one, and I think you'll like it too. So think about your ideas. Send us an idea. If we use it, you're going to get that book. But either way, check it out. So, what are our takeaways for today? Where you spend your time should be where your values are and your beliefs are, where your priorities are, and how you choose to behave and to live your priorities is based on your vision. Now, your vision is based on your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. But let's spread those out a little bit. Let's not just have a thought and a feeling and a behavior and run right through it into the same old patterns. Let's try to think a little more deeply about what we feel and maybe look at our behavior. The life that we want is our choice to a point. There will always be mitigating factors. There will always be things that come along and sweep us off our feet, for better or for worse. But there are things that we can do within that to change our habits, to assert our needs, and to allow ourselves to recognize the options beyond where we are. So having the life you want, there's not some book that you can buy or some TV show that you could watch that's going to guide you down the path, because the path is yours and it's very unique to you. But most of us haven't even been able to look at what is it I really want, because we're so busy doing laundry or raking leaves or working, to think about internally what we really would connect to or what we really need. Allow yourself to recognize the chapters of your life that have taken you here, taken you to a point where you can sit and listen to a podcast about considering your options or your growth. Be worthy of the next chapter. Create the next chapter. Deal with what you have to deal with. Do the things you don't want to do, but create a space to do the things that you do want to do. So next time, we are going to talk about emotional regulation. This is a really big part of how you do make the life that you want. It's by learning how to feel your feelings in a way that doesn't hurt you. So emotional regulation, a revolutionary way to think about your feelings. That's exactly what we're going to be doing in our next episode. So thank you, my sunshines, for coming, for watering the seeds in you to grow yourself. And until our next time, have a sunny day.